All right, guys. Having a little trouble with personal jurisdiction? You've come to the right place. My name is Michael. Welcome to Bar and Chill. And today we're going to keep it real simple. We're going to explain personal jurisdiction in a way that you can remember it and bring it with you up here into the exam room. So let's check it out. Here's an example outline, and I kid you not, I've taken the bar exam twice, passed twice, and this was my personal jurisdiction outline. I kept it really simple so that I could remember it when I'm actually taking the exam. And it's very important to always keep a forest point of, bird's eye view over the forest. We don't want to get lost in the trees. And so looking at this outline, personal jurisdiction, the fancy way of saying what it's about is that we want to make sure that jurisdiction over the defendant does not offend traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice, which is the fancy way of saying we need to make sure that it is fair to have jurisdiction over a defendant. And there's two ways that the law says it's fair: general and specific jurisdiction. To get general jurisdiction, three things: domicile, consent, personal service. For specific jurisdiction, sufficient minimum contacts. That's it. That's the skeleton. That's the big picture of personal jurisdiction. Now, if we look at domicile, if the defendant's an individual, that is the state in which the defendant is physically present with intent to remain. Excuse me, my phone is going off. If it's a corporation, that is the state of incorporation or principal place of business. And if it's a partnership slash LLC, that is the domicile of any partner, up to 50 states. For a corporation, it's up to 2 states, and for an individual, it could only be 1 state. And for an individual, the test is at the time when the complaint is filed, not at the time of the cause of action arose. That's very important to remember. And the other thing that's important is if you have a state that meets one of the elements for an individual, like if you're physically present in Utah, but you had intent to remain, say, in Colorado, we look to the last state that this individual met the 2 elements, meaning once you meet the 2 elements, that's your domicile. And until you meet those 2 elements in a different state, that is when the domicile will change. So don't get that confused. For consent, that typically looks like a contractual consent or voluntary appearance. And for personal service, that is simply when the defendant is present in the state and they are physically served. And key word on my outline here is that voluntarily present. If you see a question where a defendant was sort of coerced or, deceived in a rather egregious way to come to the forum state, you might have an issue of fairness there. Because remember, don't lose sight. The big picture is we want to make sure that it's fair for the defendant to be there. Then for specific jurisdiction, we look for sufficient minimum contacts. I'm sure that was your favorite question on the 1L civil procedure exam, where we had to go into the facts of all the sufficient minimum contacts. But luckily in the bar exam, we don't need to do that. Just keep the black letter law fresh up here, nice, clean, available to sort of grab it right when you need it. 3 things: sufficient minimum contacts, purposeful availment in a way that the defendant can reasonably foresee that they're going to court there. The cause of action arose out of the contacts that the defendant has with that state. And reasonable. It is reasonable for the defendant to be there. So there's 3 things you want to look at. Now, so purposeful availment, such that it's foreseeable to go to court there. You want to just see if the defendant is the one initiating contact with the plaintiff who resides in the forum. If you ever see the plaintiff reach out to a defendant and then all of a sudden the plaintiff wants to sue that defendant who lives in another state, that's an example of where purposeful availment fails because the plaintiff reached out. But if the defendant is the one looking to go into the forum state, it's likely foreseeable that they could be hailed into court there. You want to make sure that whatever cause of action is going on, it arose out of those contacts with the forum. So if the defendant, I live in Colorado, and if I get on the phone and I start selling newspapers or magazines or whatever to the state of Florida, okay, but I release a hit piece in my magazine that only gets disseminated in the state of Illinois, you might have a sufficient minimum contacts issue because the cause of action may not, the connection to the cause of action has nothing to do with Florida. The evidence and all that stuff is likely in Illinois. And lastly, for sufficient minimum contacts to be met, it has to be reasonable for the defendant to go to court. Factors for reasonableness include the burden on the defendant to have to go to the forum state, the burden on the plaintiff to sue elsewhere, and where the evidence and witnesses are located. Those are simple factors for the element of reasonableness under sufficient minimum contacts, and that's personal jurisdiction. I hope I kept it simple. Hopefully this is helpful and provides you a bit of a roadmap on how to memorize personal jurisdiction so that you can bring it with you to the bar exam. And what I believe is you can practice all you want. It's important, but you're really only as good as what you can bring with you to the bar exam up here. Thank you for watching Bar and Chill, and if you have any specific questions, please check the pinned comment down below. I'll have my email there, and you can email me anytime, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.